service, but you may not be involved for another 40 years. What happens after that?
Well, obviously we've got to find and train replacements. This is an odd game. There's only two major teams in the country and they're both military teams. And to replace us guys, you've got to have people that are suitably qualified youth leaders, that know how to work with health and safety, that know the motorcycle game, that want to work with children and are there for their benefit. Not easy to get. Hitherto we've been able to do it with volunteers, but because it's such a big thing now, 7 days a week, we're going to have to try and find funding to pay salaries for at least 2 key people. And therein lies the problem. Over the last few years, funding for the youth service has been cut and cut and cut to almost zero. So that is a huge concern for us, finding the correct funding to train and put the right people in post and to keep them there.
And I guess a lot of people would be surprised to say that funding for youth services here in an Olympic borough has been cut. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised because I think it's a bit short-sighted. It appears, and I say this with some care, because our local borough has been very supportive and very helpful, and without them we wouldn't be here. But they are as frustrated as us that central government funding has been cut to organisations like us. We have no regular funding now from the local authority. We are allowed to apply for grants and have some success in that from time to time. But what is surprising, it would appear that if we were taking children inside the youth justice system, in other words, children who were delinquents, there would be no problem with funding. The philosophy of this group is for them to join young as 5, and prevent them ever getting into trouble in the first place, on the principle that it's a damn sight harder to divert a 14-year-old from crime than it is to keep a 5-year-old all the way through his growing years out of trouble. And of course it stands to reason, if between 5 and 16 they've been out of trouble, they're not likely to be getting...
Bought a site to move on to. The building was there and they didn't need it. They were going to actually break it up for firewood, and it just so happened that one of our volunteer staff happened to be at their site at the time they were discussing it, and he said, well, would you be prepared to give it to a charity? So they said, well, if you can get it moved, then by all means you're welcome to it, and that's how it came into our possession. The whole thing so far has been done entirely by volunteer labour and by volunteer companies volunteering to help out. The lorries that transported the sections, it was all given free, gratis and for nothing.
So now you've got the building, what happens next?
Well, we are working on it, and the idea is to develop it from what it was, which was an office block, into a meeting hall, together with offices, toilets, kitchen and staff accommodation.
Is this sort of indicative of the ambitions and plans for the Imps for the future?
Well, I mean, we've existed now for nearly 40 years, and it's only sort of the last few years since we've been on this site that we've been able to look towards having a permanent, proper headquarters. Since we moved here, we've managed with the smaller porter cabin that we've had almost since we moved in, and the lorry containers for storage of bikes and workshops and what have you. But the idea is to give us a headquarters that's large enough to house all the kids when we've got the whole team here together, which the porter cabin isn't at the moment, where we can have parents' meetings, social functions, and generally develop what the team does at the moment.
So from this empty shell, so to speak, what's the timescale for when this is actually a beautiful office?
We hope to have it finished by or in an occupiable state, hopefully by Easter. But we're probably aiming a bit higher there. But at the same time, if you don't aim for it, you don't achieve anything. And we've had the electricians in, they've run all the cabling ready for putting the fittings in. We've now got to finish putting all the plasterboard up in all the various sections, and once we've done that, they will come back, the electricians will come back in and put all the fixtures and fittings in. And then it's largely a question of decoration and plumbing, and then it you know, will be ready to use.
Applications and bureaucracy.
Absolutely. Most funding applications, I would say the size of, you know, the yellow pages, they really are intense. And certainly, you know, the criteria that's laid down for any funding will be the usual. You know, but in the Imps we do cover for all walks of life, every child, every ability, every race, creed, colour. You know, we have no you know, obviously we've got an anti-discrimination policy anyway. The problem is with it, obviously this organisation is run on volunteers. Now Brian, who you've already seen, in fact does do most of the funding applications, assisted, you know, hopefully by me sometimes, and they really are intense. So, including the Every Child Matters policy, which of course is something that we work within, and when we're applying for funding and get refusals on grounds such as you have no young offenders, then, you know, frankly, that sort of answer and response, we find unacceptable. When we, you know, do cater for every other box that's on the form, you know, which covers nationality, race, religion, everything, you know. And I think it's very unjust when you get hit with a refusal because you don't have young offenders. Perhaps part of why we haven't got offenders is some of these kids start at 5 years old. You know, they can't be criminally liable until they're 10, and they stay with us until they're 16. Now, you know, some of these kids, especially in the 11 to 16-year-old bracket, you know, they're local kids. This is a unique organisation that takes up an awful lot of their time every weekend. You can see the training. You know, these kids train every weekend, and they're here, they're committed, they're dedicated, and at the end of the day, they are not on the streets. You know, so here we are giving them a safe environment in an environment that hopefully they're going to learn other skills for the future, keeping them safe. They're not exposed to drugs and knife crime, etc. And frankly, the funding issue is becoming a real problem. You've seen the building, you've seen the vehicles, and you know, that really is the security of the future of the Imps. You know, and the ex-Imps, and the fact this organisation has been going for so long. I personally, as a mother of one of the Imps as well, would find it catastrophic to see this industry or this organisation have to close. It is a distinct possibility that that will happen.